Hello, my name is Liv Jones. I'm an aspiring actor and writer. I work in a secondhand bookshop and I make videos for BookTube. And 3 months ago, I decided to take on my biggest challenge yet. One that would result in me making my longest video ever and my first video that is more than an hour long. I want you to take a look at this photo. This is a screenshot from the very first clip I recorded for this video, just before I started this challenge. Look closely at the light in my eyes, that hope, that naivety. Now, over the course of this video, I want you to watch as that light in my eyes dies. I'm not the same person I was when I started making this video. This challenge, it took a toll on me, and it made me wonder, is this really the price I have to pay just to entertain a few people on YouTube? Are a few views and likes really worth jeopardizing my motivation to create content, my love of reading, and even my own innocence? Is anything really worth that? Nah, I'm just kidding. Enjoy the video. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video. So, if you could not already tell from the title of this video, it might be a long one, because this video will not end until I find myself a 5-star read. And I do not give 5 stars lightly. Out of this entire year, in which I have read nearly 100 books now, I've only given 4 books 5 stars. They need to be like perfect, flawless, no notes kind of books that like make me laugh, make me cry, leave a gaping hole in my chest after I finish the book because I already miss being in that world. That is the kind of book that I give 5 stars to, and I'm not going to finish this video until I find it. I have actually tried to make this video before. However, the very first book that I read for the video was a 5-star read. It was The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers, and yeah, I loved that book. I couldn't not give it 5 stars. But that was the last book that I rated 5 stars, and I am on a mission to find the next. And I do think that this is going to be quite a lengthy mission. It's currently November and I am fully expecting this video to go on into next year. I'm just thinking that it's gonna be a nightmare to edit. Why did I choose to do this to myself? Anyway, it's too late to turn back now and we're gonna get going. So I have also just started my I bought 3 romance books from the works. I'm gonna review them video because, you know, killing 2 birds with 1 stone, right? So that is what I'm starting with. I am going to read Sorry I Missed You by Lorraine Brown, and I don't think this is going to be a 5-star read because I don't tend to give romance books 5 stars. It's not that I don't like romance books, but it's more like they don't tend to fulfill all the criteria that I need to rate a book 5 stars. But I am willing to be proved wrong, so I will check back in when I have finished. Right, hello. I have read 3 books since we last spoke, so I thought I'd give you a little bit of an update. So these are the 3 books that I read for my 3 for £6 at the Works video. We've got Sorry I Missed You by Lorraine Brown, we've got The Hookup Plan by Farah Roshon, and The Singles Table by Sarah Desai. Now I'm just going to give you a very brief review of kind of all 3 of these books, so feel free to check out that video if you would like more in-depth reviews of all 3. So I ended up rating this one 3.25 stars, I think, this one 3.5 stars, and this one 2.5 stars. I sensed a little bit of a trend with all 3 of these books in that they tended to be kind of low stakes, fairly tropey, cheesy, wholesome romances, which is really good if you're looking for something that's just kind of a bit of light entertainment, doesn't require a massive amount of brain power to kind of digest and enjoy. But for me, those kinds of books aren't typically my cup of tea, and so I'm not going to give them 5 stars. So we are down 3 books now. I am currently reading 2 books. I am very slowly getting to the end of Joan by Catherine J. Chen, which is a retelling of the life of Joan of Arc. I think I have like 2 chapters left. So I will hopefully finish that fairly soon and give you an update. I already know that it's not going to be a 5-star read because it's been quite an effort to get through. And then I'm also reading The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, and I think that this one might rate pretty highly. I don't know if it's going to quite get to 5 stars, but I am really enjoying it thus far. So once I've finished that, I will also update you. Hello, I'm ill right now. I've got a really sore throat, so I'm not going to talk for that long because I don't think I can physically. I have just done a week of shows for a local production of A Chorus Line, which was so much fun. I love that show so much, and I had an absolute blast, but it was so exhausting, and now I am very ill. And yeah, but over the past week I have finished 2 books, and I'm just going to quickly sum up my thoughts for you. So the first book I finished was Joan by Catherine J. Chen, which is a feminist retelling of the life of Joan of Arc. And let me tell you, it was a relief to finally finish it because I have been wading through that book since September. Some books are sprints and you can read them so quickly and you get through like 100 pages a day at least, and you can just kind of blitz through them. Some books are like marathons and it takes you absolutely ages to get through just like a chapter because the prose is so kind of densely packed that it takes a lot of energy and effort to focus on it and get through it. Joan was one such book, and I'm not like faulting the writing or anything. The writing was really good. Some of my favourite bits were when the narration kind of suddenly switched into Joan's internal monologue and she kind of creates this whole like speech that is super powerful, and she kind of goes through what she would want to say to whoever she's speaking to at that point, and it's just so well written and really powerful and evocative. However, it did take overall about 2/3 of the book for it to get interesting to me, and for me personally it should not take 2/3 of a book to start enjoying said book. If I wasn't determined to not have any DNFs this year, and I'm still going strong on that target, if I didn't have that goal I probably would have DNF'd Joan, and I think I would have been fine and happy had I done that and moved on to other books, especially like other ebooks that I have on my Kindle and I have been dying to read, and I haven't let myself start another one because if I did then I would have just forgotten about Joan and given up on it entirely, and I was not going to do that. I was so determined to carry on with it. And in some respects I am glad that I did carry on with it because it did get very interesting and I did enjoy the last kind of third of the book. But that doesn't really balance out the kind of the 2/3 that is spent on like Joan's childhood and her kind of growing up and preparing for fighting this war with England. Had it been structured differently, like the structure as it is, it's very chronological and it's split into like 5 sections. You've got like Joan's childhood and her training, and then like her kind of rise and fall with the king and his kind of court. Had it had like a non-chronological structure where maybe there could have been like flashbacks to her childhood that were more kind of brief and succinct, maybe that would have made the book a little bit more engaging to me overall. But I did still enjoy the book and I appreciated how well written it is, and I think I would recommend it. Just like bear in mind that you need to be in the right headspace to be able to focus on such like dense passages of text. So overall I'm going to give it a 3-star rating. Not the worst book I've read, but very much not the best book. And then this morning I finished reading The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. And yeah, there's not really much that I need to say about this book. It's your classic sad girl read. I did really enjoy it. I think now was kind of the perfect time for me to read it as, you know, a young woman who doesn't really know what to do with her life. And Sylvia Plath's voice is so incredibly ahead of its time. Like, it would not feel out of place in a literary fiction novel that had been written in the last like 5 years. She just so perfectly describes feelings that people still experience today. However, it's not a 5-star read. I ended up rating it 4.5 stars for 2 main reasons. The first reason was just kind of the presence of a lot of quite casual racism in the book, as well as fat phobia and homophobia. And like, I get that this book was written a long time ago and it is somewhat a product of its time. However, I do still think that the presence of such casual racism was very much unnecessary, and it did kind of detract from the overall reading experience. I do still think that you're able to enjoy and appreciate works of fiction like this. However, it's also important to acknowledge those problematic elements and think critically about the media that you are consuming. I do believe that the racism in this book is kind of common knowledge. Like, people are very much aware that it is present. And yeah, I just think it's important to bear it in mind if you're, recommending this book, especially if you want to recommend it to people who might be triggered by the use of such language or sentiments. And besides that, the second reason why I gave it 4.5 stars, not 5 stars, was because I felt that there were points when it kind of dragged a little bit in terms of plot. Like, I didn't expect Esther's trip to New York to end like halfway through the book, and then there's like a whole other chunk of novel that happens after that. And like, I am all for books that are like no plot, just vibes. However, I do feel like there were perhaps some flashback scenes that could have been made more concise, or perhaps some of the scenes in the asylum that could have been shortened. I don't know. Like, I do get that the whole kind of tone of the book is very bleak and like nothing much happens, but I do still feel like perhaps things got a little bit repetitive at times, just in my opinion. Next up, I think I'm going to make a start on this book. This is The End We Start From by Megan Hunter, and I'm not gonna lie, I bought this book based just on the cover alone because it's so gorgeous. Like, it is so shiny. It's quite short, and I'm really in the mood for something that is short and a little bit more fast-paced. So I think that this is the perfect book to continue this challenge with. Hello, I'm still sick. I still have a cold. I'm still feeling pretty rubbish, but no rest for the wicked. So I'm gonna keep filming, telling you about the books that I've read. So today I finished reading This is how sick I am. I literally can't remember what I've just finished reading. I literally finished it like 2 hours ago. So earlier today I finished reading Pride and Premeditation by Tessa Price, which is a murder mystery adaptation of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. And I'm a pretty big fan of Pride and Prejudice. I love that book. It's one of my favourite classics. It's one of my favourite books that I read at school. I loved the 1995 miniseries with Colin Firth. So yeah, I thought I would enjoy it. And I did. Like, I sped through it in like 3 days. And yeah, I absolutely devoured it. Om nom nom, very good, very nice, tasty, delicious. So yeah, it does pretty much what it says on the tin. It's a murder mystery that isn't like a faithful adaptation of the novel, but it uses the characters and it does reference quite a few lines of dialogue in the original novella, and it's got kind of like this feminist tone to it as well. Like, Lizzie is an aspiring barrister and she wants to work at her father's law firm, but because she's a woman in Regency England, she doesn't have a lot of power to do so. So she decides to take on this murder case in order to prove the innocence of this gentleman, Mr. Bingley, but she finds that she has to work alongside Mr. Bingley's friend and solicitor, Mr. Darcy, in order to prove his innocence. And I thought the mystery was really interesting. It was very well written. Like, I feel like if you're like me and you know the story really well, you could probably suss out who the guilty characters are quite quickly, but it was still like super interesting because there were lots of little twists. And I did also really like Lizzie and Darcy's kind of rivals to lovers dynamic. I thought they played off each other really well as like both very smart, intelligent, witty characters. I did have like one criticism for it though that was kind of related to the whole Lizzie and Darcy romance aspect. And that is that one of my favourite things about Pride and Prejudice is that the romance between Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy comes completely out of left field. Like, you have no idea that Mr. Darcy is harbouring such romantic feelings towards Elizabeth, and you obviously don't think that Elizabeth is harbouring feelings towards Mr. Darcy. Like, she's very kind of, you can see it like in her thoughts that she doesn't like him at all. She doesn't really think very highly of him. And at that point, Jane Austen is very much kind of gearing the romance to happen between Elizabeth and Mr. Wickham. So the whole like confession of feelings and marriage proposal the first time around from Mr. Darcy comes completely out of left field. Like, it is as much a shock to the reader as it is to Elizabeth, because you literally don't see it coming. You have no idea that Darcy feels that way. And it's only then that you start to kind of consider them as a match, and, you know, Elizabeth starts to consider Mr. Darcy a match for her. Whereas in Pride and Premeditation, you are immediately informed that Lizzie finds Mr. Darcy pretty attractive. Like, you can just tell. The tone of the book is very different. It's very much more set out like a contemporary rom-com, which was, you know, great in some respects because it made it very easy to read and digest, and I think that's the reason why I completely sped through it. But I did kind of miss that like very restrained tone that you find in the original novella, like the kind of yearning that happens. Like, you don't really get that in this book, and it's a very, very minor criticism, but it's definitely something that I missed. But other than that, I did really enjoy it. I think overall I'm going to give it a 3.75, which is still like a good rating. I did very much enjoy it, and I would recommend it to anyone who enjoyed Pride and Prejudice. But that was Pride and Premeditation by Tessa Price. I am currently reading The End We Start From, and it's a very short book, so I probably aim to finish it tomorrow, and I will update you when it happens. As it stands, I think I'm about 30% through it, and I am really enjoying it, so I think it's going to get a high rating. We'll just see if it is a very, very high rating. Hello, I still have a cold. I'm still in my illness hoodie. I'm still feeling pretty awful. But I have finished The End We Start From by Megan Hunter, and that made me feel a little bit less rubbish. This is a little book about a woman who has just given birth to her newborn son when the whole of England is kind of destroyed and left inhospitable by flooding, and she and her son and her husband have to flee and become refugees, and we kind of follow her story from there as her son grows and develops amidst this very tumultuous landscape. It deals with concepts of motherhood and family and home and belonging and grief and grieving for people who you don't actually know have died. You don't know what's happened to them, so you don't have that kind of closure. The narration is kind of told in this like kind of bullet pointy short paragraphs. I don't know if you can see, but it's like very short kind of singular thoughts throughout, and it's quite non-chronological. There's not really a lot of rhyme or reason to it. It's very stream of consciousness, and yet overall it tells this very touching and heart-wrenching story. It is actually fairly similar to another book that I read this year. Hold on. This is No One Was Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood, which uses a very similar kind of method of storytelling in that it's like kind of very brief paragraphs that are kind of tweet-like, and through that it also tells a very kind of heartbreaking story about a newborn child. And I honestly really enjoyed both of these books, so if you've read one of these and not the other, then I would definitely recommend picking the other one up. But yeah, this one was really, really good. I very much enjoyed reading it. It was very quick to get through. I wouldn't necessarily call it no plot, just vibes, because there is definitely a plot. However, I would possibly call it no exposition, just feelings, because you are not told a lot of context in this. All of the information you get, you kind of have to infer from the text, and that kind of lends itself to the whole theme in this book of kind of communication, and the fact that as this whole crisis is happening, communication completely breaks down, and you can only really get information from being told by other people who have in turn been told by other people before that, and so on and so forth.
So you don't get a massive amount of context, but what you do get is a lot of really heartfelt descriptions of emotions and experiences. It's very much zooming into the very, very tiny details of the big picture, but sometimes those small details are just as important. So yeah, I did very much enjoy this. I think I'm going to give it 4.25 stars, maybe 4.5 stars. It's not quite 5 stars, and that's not me just saying that so that I can carry on this video. I would love to give it 5 stars, but it just didn't really leave me with that feeling that a 5-star book leaves me with. Maybe I should have read it all in one sitting. I feel like it would be the type of book that is probably best read just kind of sat down in one session, just taken in like that. But the way I read it, I started it and then put it down for a couple of days to finish Pride and Premeditation, and then I picked it back up and finished it. So maybe that didn't help, but I can potentially see myself coming back to this in the future. So yeah, that was The End We Start From by Megan Hunter. Next up, I'm going to give this book a go. This is The House with the Golden Door by Elodie Harper. This is a sequel to The Wolf Den, which I read back in May, I think, and absolutely loved. I gave it 4.75 stars. It's definitely one of my favourite books I've read this year, so I am very much hoping that this matches that vibe, and I'm going to love this one just as much. Hello! So last night I finished reading The House with the Golden Door by Elodie Harper, and oh my god. So this is the second book in the Wolf Den trilogy, which is set in ancient Pompeii in around the 70s AD, and it follows Amara, who is a slave girl. She is forced to work in one of the brothels in the city, and in this book she has escaped slavery. She's been freed and she's living as a courtesan with a very wealthy but temperamental patron. But she realizes that she is not as free as it may appear because her former owner is hunting her down, and she falls in love and has to go through this kind of forbidden romance. So normally I find that the second book in a trilogy or a series is kind of the flop book. It's not usually as good as the first book, and it's sometimes a little bit of a disappointment, especially if I have loved the first book. And I absolutely adored The Wolf Den. I gave it 4.75 stars. So I was kind of expecting this one to be not quite as good. However, oh my god. So my two favourite things about The Wolf Den were its description of the setting and Pompeii as a city, and its kind of depiction of women and female relationships. And The House of the Golden Door has both those things in spades. Like Elodie Harper's descriptions of Pompeii as this kind of really full, vibrant, lively city that also has kind of this darker, seedier side to it. It transports you right into this city that, you know, existed 2,000 years ago. But it's as if it like still exists, and you're reading the book and you're like there in the city, walking around it with Amara. Like, the descriptions of the city and its inhabitants are like that vivid. And then you also have brilliantly written characters. Amara is just a fantastic protagonist. Like, she's not entirely like morally good or wise by any means. Like, she doesn't make the best decisions all the time. In fact, she makes some really, really stupid decisions in this book that like made me want to like bang my head against a wall. But what's really great about her characterization is that you can fully understand why she makes those decisions out of like desperation and determination to protect herself and the people she loves and rise through the ranks of Pompeian society. And what I also love is that Elodie Harper also gives so much depth to like even the minor characters. Like, there is a slave girl in this book called Martha who is kind of on loan to Amara from her patron, and she could have been so easily like brushed off as just kind of a side character who is just there to do things for Amara, especially now that Amara is now like a freed woman and she is kind of a level above slaves in kind of the society. So she could have very easily, you know, brushed any of the like new kind of slave characters aside, but she doesn't do that. She, like, there's this really lovely moment
where, well, it's not lovely like kind of in the context of the rest of the book, but essentially they kind of have to care for this character that's been seriously injured, and Martha kind of takes it upon herself to care for this character, and she says that she isn't going to do it for Amara or for any of Amara's friends, but because the people who wounded this one character, I'm really trying not to spoil the book, because the people who wounded this character are the Romans. They're the same people who sacked Jerusalem, which is where Martha is from, and she has this kind of sense of solidarity with the character who was also attacked. And it's that kind of depth to like even the side characters that really makes the book so kind of vivid and full of life. And then I also want to like really quickly mention the fact that Felix, who is Amara's former owner and kind of the villain of the series, like he is honestly one of the best, but also like the worst in a sense, book villains I have come across in a really long time. Like he is just so awful. He is a terrible person, and like you just hate him because he's so slimy. But at the same time, Amara keeps like describing how kind of disarmingly charming he can be, and like he's just really clever. He always seems like he's like one step ahead all the time, and it just like really keeps you on your toes throughout the whole book. Like the tension is never kind of lowered because you always feel like he's kind of ready to make his next move and put Amara's freedom in jeopardy again. So you're probably thinking that I'm going to give this book a 5-star rating and this video is going to be over. However, and I'm not just saying this because I want the video to keep going, because I would actually be really happy if the video ended and I had less stuff to edit. I am going to give this 4.75 stars, the same rating I gave to The Wolf Den. And the reason I'm not going to give it 5 stars is because I was thinking it was a 5-star worthy book up until like a few chapters before the end. And unfortunately, a few chapters before the end, there is the use of a trope that I really do not like, and that is the miscommunication trope. And it got in the way of the main kind of relationship in this book and kind of messed it all up, and that really annoyed me. It's like one of those moments where you're just like willing the characters to actually talk to each other, and it becomes just like so frustrating that it kind of puts you off the whole reading experience. Like that is what the miscommunication trope makes me feel like. So I'm really not a fan. And for that reason, and it might seem like a little bit of a superficial reason to not give it 5 stars, but my 5-star worthy books are literally, they're meant to be flawless. They're meant to be perfect. They're meant to be like the best reading experience I have ever had. And unfortunately, the miscommunication trope will cost you a 5-star rating. Call me brutal, call me shallow, I don't care. This is a 4.75 star book, which is still a really, really good rating, and I do love this trilogy so far. And I can't wait to read The House of Fortuna, although I'm going to have to because I have decided that I'm waiting until May when the book comes out in paperback before I read it, because it really annoys me when I have like the entire series or the entire trilogy of books and like 1 or 2 of them are hardback instead of paperback, and that happens a lot, and I don't like it. So I'm gonna wait until May, which coincidentally is when I do my kind of mythology retelling-y reading month challenge thing, so that's gonna happen. But yeah, I'm really impatient. So yes, House of Gondor, so good. Oh my god, loved it. We are going to kind of keep going with the historical retelling vibe, because I'm reading now. I've just started She Who Became the Sun, and this is a kind of reimagining of a period of Chinese history,
and I have only read the first chapter so far, but I will update you when I've finished with my thoughts.
Hello, so it's been a while since I updated you guys. It's been maybe 2 weeks, and so lots to talk about. I'm gonna do it fairly quickly. I say that, but I'm gonna go off on a tangent anyway. So, first book I finished was She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan, and this is a book that's a historical retelling, reimagining with fantasy elements. It's set during the 14th century, and it's about a girl who assumes her dead brother's identity to essentially rise through the ranks of this rebel army and try and defeat the Huns who have invaded China. There were definitely bits about this book that I enjoyed. I really liked kind of the political intrigue parts, and especially kind of the second half where it got to the point where the characters were so kind of complex and all had different motivations and were so driven that you could kind of see everything coming to a head, but you weren't sure kind of what characters were like one step ahead of others. So I did really enjoy kind of spending time with different characters. It kind of starts off from the perspective of this one girl, but then it expands to the perspectives of so many different characters on kind of both sides of this war. And you do end up sympathizing with a lot of them, but at the same time, none of them are particularly good characters. Like, they are all very much morally grey. The pacing of the book I found a little bit slow. I would liken it kind of to a book that I read last month, I think. I read it over the course of like 3 months. Joan by Catherine J. Chen, which is a reimagining of Joan of Arc's life. It was quite similar to that in the sense that it was kind of a historical retelling and had kind of political intrigue and battle war aspects, and it had some sort of like supernatural elements to it as well, but the pacing of that is very similar to the pacing of this book. I'd say this one, the pacing's a little bit faster, and I think that's what made me enjoy this book slightly more, but at the same time I definitely still found it dragging at points, and I think as a result of that I was quite relieved to finish it. It was a lot longer than I thought it would be. I was originally kind of looking at this book and being like, oh yeah, 300 pages, something like that. No, it's like over 400 pages long. And yeah, it took a while. I'm glad I read it. I don't think I'm going to be continuing with the duology. There's a sequel to this book, but I don't know if I'm going to be wanting to read it. We'll see. I don't know. But yeah, so obviously this one was not a 5-star read. I ended up rating it 3.5 stars, I think. So yeah, that was She Who Became the Sun. I did take a break from reading that book about halfway through, and in that break I read this book in a single day. This is Where Three Roads Meet by Sally Vickers. It's part of the Canongate Myths series, which is kind of a series of shortish retellings of different myths from around the world by lots of different authors, and this one is a retelling of the myth of Oedipus, and it essentially takes place over the course of the last, I think, 2 years of Sigmund Freud's life. And Freud is visited over this period several times by a mysterious visitor who comes to him to tell him this myth of Oedipus. And I just found that concept so interesting. Like, I was immediately hooked when I read the blurb of this book. It's such an interesting concept because Freud's work really altered the kind of common perception of the character of Oedipus and his story beyond kind of recognition. Like, if you ask kind of the average person what they think of when they think of Oedipus, they will think of Freud and they will think of the Oedipus complex. And yeah, it's just like pure dialogue, apart from a prologue at the very beginning which details mostly kind of the last few years of Sigmund Freud's life, which definitely provided a good amount of context for the rest of the story. And yeah, it was a very interesting interpretation of the myth with some really quite interesting takes on it. And one of my favourite running gags was every time Freud tried to interject with like some kind of scientific explanation or introduce like one of his theories or something he'd been researching during his life, the mysterious visitor would be like, okay, whatever you want to say, Mr. Freud. Like, it was very, very subtly patronizing, and it was very funny every single time. So yeah, I definitely really enjoyed this book. I'm kind of between giving it 4.25 and 4.5 stars, probably leaning towards 4.25. But yeah, it was really good. I enjoyed it. And then the third book, which I just finished reading this morning, was Winter by Ali Smith. I kind of wanted to read something vaguely seasonal because it is in the run up to Christmas now, and I have been gradually accumulating Ali Smith's seasonal quartet over the past couple months. I got 3 of the books so far. I just need summer and the companion piece now. And yeah, I wanted to start with this one, even though this isn't the first one technically in the series, because it is winter and I thought it would be kind of fun to read the stories as the seasons progress. And this has kind of this non-chronological, quite complicated plot that kind of drifts between like past and present and future, but it kind of centers around this family converging on a big cottage in Cornwall for 3 days over Christmas. So you've got the mother, who is in her 70s and she owns the house, and then you've got her sister, the aunt, who is this very kind of free spirit, and she has been involved in a lot of like protests, and she works with refugees. And then you've got her son, who is coming to visit, and he runs this like nature blog, except his ex-girlfriend is currently impersonating him on this nature blog and like destroying his reputation. And he brings along this complete stranger and pays her £1,000 to pretend to be his girlfriend at this Christmas gathering. So you've got all 4 of those very kind of distinct personalities all coming together at Christmas, and obviously there's a lot of conflict with that. But as I said, it's very non-chronological. It kind of dips into different characters' pasts, and you get to understand a lot more about them that way. It also kind of, you get glimpses into the future at times, which is also very interesting. And what I think Ali Smith does really well is she kind of captures this kind of bleakness and this melancholy that is just very, very wintry. The kind of present is set during the second half of the 2010s, and the politics is very much kind of prevalent. There's a lot of discussion about, like, because it's set in England, there's a lot of discussion about the British politics of that time and Boris Johnson, but there's also discussion, lots of mentions of like the Trump presidency as well, and all of those discussions about like refugees and stuff. Basically everything that was happening in the political sphere before the pandemic that everyone ended up forgetting about because the pandemic was happening, it's all kind of brought to the forefront here. So it's been very interesting reading it now that the pandemic has passed and being reminded of all of the stuff that was very much overshadowed by the pandemic. How many times can I say pandemic in one sentence? The prose is absolutely stunning. It's so beautifully written, and I think if you were to read this book, I've only read one other Ali Smith book so far, but it was kind of similar to this one in that you just kind of have to accept that you're not going to know what's going on all the time. Like, you just have to accept that you're going to be at least slightly confused most of the time, because there are things that happen in here that are not particularly explained. I don't really want to spoil it, but yeah, there are things that happen, so it's kind of a bit bizarre in that aspect. But once you get past that and you just kind of immerse yourself in the prose and the writing and whatever bits of the story you can piece together. It is a really stunning read, and I really enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to reading the rest of the seasonal quartet. So again, I was kind of between rating it 4.25 and 4.5 stars, much like with Where Three Roads Meet, but I'm going to give this one 4.5 stars, I think. It's still not a 5-star read, but I did really, really enjoy it. So, Winter by Ali Smith. So, what's next? I have decided to stick with this kind of seasonal theme, and I'm going to read If on a Winter's Night a Traveller by Italo Calvino. And I don't think this is particularly wintry, but you know, the title alludes to that, so I'm counting it. And I have this on a very strong recommendation from a friend of mine who really, really enjoyed it, so I have high hopes for this book, and I will update you when I finished it. I am starting to think that maybe doing this video wasn't a very good idea. I think I've gotten myself into this like purgatory-esque state where I keep wanting and expecting to get a 5-star read, and then I get overly disappointed that the book that I'm reading isn't perfect, and so I rate it more harshly, if that makes sense. Because I've had a lot of near misses so far, and yes, none of those books are 5-star reads. Like, I'm not going to change my rating of them, but that doesn't mean that they're not bad books. I've actually had some really good books I've read recently in this video, and I worry that I'm not appreciating them enough because they're not 5 stars. But anyway, Merry Christmas. Oh dear. I'm feeling very festive, as you can probably tell. So I did finish If on a Winter's Night a Traveller, and I did actually really enjoy it. I thought it was a really ingenious bit of storytelling. Like, it's genuinely unlike anything I have ever read before or probably ever read again. Like, it's just such a clever book, almost too clever, and it really understands a lot of really kind of minute details about like being a reader, like the search for the perfect book, which is literally what I'm going on right at this very moment, so it was very apt. But also like the fact that you have to be in like a really comfy position to read, because you're not going to want to get up and disrupt your reading experience to like get into a comfier position or to like answer the door or the phone or something. So this book is basically, it's told in the second person, so you are the reader, and the reader is essentially trying to read this book. He basically starts off by starting a book that is supposed to be If on a Winter's Night a Traveller, but it turns out to not be that book, and there's a issue in like the printing of it, so he goes to like take it back and he gets this entirely different book, but that also has an issue with the printing, and he ends up starting 10 completely different stories, and he travels around the world to try and like resolve these issues. He gets very much sidetracked, and every time he starts a story he gets like a few pages in and then he's interrupted by some like kind of different reason, and as it turns out the story that he wanted to read is actually in the end his own story. He went on his own adventure. It is really smart. Like, the start was really, really good. The ending, like the last few pages of the book, was fantastic. The middle was a little bit muddy. I got a little bit lost. You know the feeling when you're like researching something or you're like doing a task? I got this a lot when I was like researching at uni, where like you're researching something and then you get a little bit sidetracked, and then it's 30 minutes later and you're knee deep in a Wikipedia article about, I don't know, Robert De Niro, and you completely lost sight of what you were doing in the first place and how you got to that point. That was very much how this book kind of was, and I feel like that could be a positive or a negative thing depending on your interpretation of that, how much you like books with that kind of vibe. I personally am a big fan of books that are like, what the hell am I reading? And that was the vibe of this book, pretty much. I did rate it 4.5 stars. As I said, the middle was a little bit murky, but again, a really, really good book and a really good experience. And I definitely don't regret reading this book at all, despite everything I said at the start of recording this. So that was If on a Winter's Night a Traveller by Italo Calvino, and yeah, I would definitely recommend this book. As well as that, I also read a little cute rom-com book over Christmas because I kind of wanted to read something vaguely festive. Like, I was just kind of in the spirit to read a cute little low stakes romance. So I decided to read The Christmas Swap by Talia Samuels, I think. So this was kind of a fake dating type forbidden romance holiday book in which the main character, one of the main characters, Margot, ends up fake dating her colleague Ben when he goes to visit his family for the holidays, and she actually ends up falling for his sister Ellie, who actually believes that Margot may or may not be a gold digger who's cheating on her boyfriend. And yeah, this was just a really cute, fluffy, sapphic romance, and it does actually get unexpectedly deep in places. Like, it does talk about like dealing with the fallout of a toxic, abusive relationship, and I think that that's handled pretty well. Like, a book always gets bonus points from me if a character kind of realizes that they need to reach out and get help and talk to a therapist about like their trauma and their issues. So that was good. And actually I was quite surprised by how much I enjoyed it, despite how it kind of relied on like the miscommunication / misunderstanding trope. Like, that's quite a large part of at least the first half of the book. And normally I'm like really not a fan of miscommunication because it just frustrates me, but I think it was done really well. It was played off as kind of comedic. Like, Ellie was thinking that Margot was a gold digger and she was going to break her brother's heart, so she obviously hated her, whereas Margot thought that Ellie really liked her because Ellie was trying to get closer to Margot to try and expose her. But in the meantime, they're kind of falling for each other, but Ellie doesn't want to fall for Margot because she thinks that Margot's a horrible person, and it's really like complicated, and it was actually really entertaining to read. I also really liked how the chapters were kind of alternating in perspectives between Ellie and Margot, and they were kind of linked as like one character would finish their chapter by saying something and then the other character would start their chapter by saying the completely opposite of that last sentence, and I thought that that was really funny and very entertaining. So yeah, overall I did really enjoy it, and I thought it was the perfect Christmassy, holiday read, and yeah, I gave it 4 stars. Again, I don't regret reading it, despite it not being 5 stars. So yeah, that was the book. So what is next? I am not sure. I think maybe I am setting my expectations too high. So I need to read a book where I have absolutely no expectations and I have no idea what it's going to be about, and then hopefully be pleasantly surprised. But first I'm going to reread the first 4 Heartstopper books and then read the 5th Heartstopper book, which I got for Christmas. And I would show you them, but they are currently propping up my phone, so I can't. But yeah, I'm going to read those, and then I'm going to read something else, and then I will get back to you. Hello, how are you? How have you been? It's been a while. Well, It's been a while for me. It's been about 2 weeks for me. It hasn't been a while for you because you're still watching the same video. But yeah, it's the new year. It's 2024 and this challenge is still going. And I've read quite a few books, so let's talk about them. So firstly, as promised, I reread the first 4 volumes of Heartstopper, and then I read for the first time Heartstopper Volume 5, and I loved it. I love this series so much. It's so sweet and wholesome, but at the same time it deals with some really deep and quite sad topics, and I think that it deals with them in a really good way. I absolutely adore Nick and Charlie's relationship, and I also really adore all of kind of the side characters and the minor characters and their friendships and their relationships, and the fact that over these 5 volumes, and there will eventually be a 6th one, all of them have had kind of a chance to grow over the course of the... Do you mind? And it's very much a coming of age story, but it's a coming of age for a lot of different characters, and not all of them are, you know, the teenagers, the school kids. This one, Volume 5, I think is my favourite volume yet. I wasn't sure if anything was going to be able to top Volume 3 with like the Paris trip and everything, but this one I have to say is my favourite. I gave it 4.75 stars, and there were a few reasons I didn't give it 5 stars. One of them was the fact that I kind of want there to be a little bit of growing room in case Volume 6 really is kind of amazing and a fantastic kind of closer to the series. And in that case, that would be 5 stars. But yeah, Heartstopper Volume 5, fantastic. Really enjoyed it. Then I managed to read one more book in 2023, and I finished it literally on New Year's Eve, and that is We Had to Remove This Post by Hannah Bevotes, translated by Emma Rowe. The concept is really interesting. It's about a woman who starts a job at this content moderation kind of sector within a social media website, and her job is to watch all of this kind of content that's been uploaded to this website that has been flagged as potentially offensive or inappropriate, and she's got to review all of it and decide whether it meets community guidelines. And as you can probably guess, like, she is there her whole shift watching this really kind of awful, terrible content, the worst kind of stuff that could be put on the internet, and that starts to mess with your head. Like, she and her colleagues start to kind of experience a change in their like sense of morality, and it gets a little bit unhinged. So yeah, I found the concept really intriguing, and I've had my eye on this book for literally months, but I wanted to specifically get the hardcover because I preferred the cover design to the soft cover. And yeah, I bought it and I read it, and yeah, the execution didn't quite live up to the concept. It just felt a little bit rushed. It's a very short book. It did not take me long to read. But yeah, it felt rushed. It didn't really expand on a lot of topics that could have been really interesting to talk about. And the ending was just really rushed. And it was supposed to be like an open ending, but it just didn't feel that way. It felt just like unfinished and anticlimactic. And yeah, it was a bit disappointing, to be honest. I didn't really want to finish the year off on such a negative note, but that's where we were. I did end up rating this one 3.5 stars. It was fine. The beginning especially was pretty interesting. As I said, the concept was really interesting. If you are going to read it, check trigger warnings. Obviously, it deals with some really heavy topics. And yeah, be prepared for a really open ending. So that was We Had to Remove This Post. And then we come on to 2024 reads. And the first book I finished this year was The Accidental Further Adventures of the 100-Year-Old Man, which is the sequel to The 100-Year-Old Man Who Climbed Out the Window and Disappeared by Jonas Jonasson, which is one of my favourite books. I really love kind of the writing style and the fact that it's such kind of unlikely heroes in a way. And I love how there are loads of different kind of plot lines that seem very disconnected until you get to a point where they all converge and it's like this great big coincidence. And out of like all of the Jonas Jonasson books that I've read, the same kind of formula applies, and it's a formula I really enjoy. So this is the sequel to The 100-Year-Old Man Who Climbed Out the Window and Disappeared, and we follow a now 101-year-old Alan Carlson, and he ends up going to North Korea to try not to help the North Koreans build a nuclear bomb, and he meets Donald Trump. He goes to Germany for a bit. He gets involved in seances and building coffins and selling them and gang warfare. It is a very wild plot, and you're never entirely sure where it's headed until you get to the very end. And I did not enjoy it as much as I enjoyed the original book. I think part of that was because there was no dual timeline, because the entirety of Alan's life, his first 100 years of life, was dealt with in the dual timeline in the first book. And so it was just kind of this one timeline going across. And although there were lots of different kind of points of view and different kind of plot lines interwoven throughout the story, I missed that dual timeline, I guess. I missed that kind of interweaving in historical events and the interweaving through more present day events. This book is set in 2016, so it's a lot more kind of closer to modern day, and there are a lot of characters and situations that do hit a lot closer to home. So yeah, overall, it wasn't as good as the original book. I still prefer the original book as a standalone work. However, it was still, you know, a fun read, and I do enjoy Jonas Jonasson's writing. And yeah, I'm planning on hopefully tackling a couple more of his books this year, if I get around to them. I did say that at the start of last year as well, so we'll see how successful I am with that. And then this morning I finished NW by Zadie Smith, and this is a story about kind of at the centre of it all are two childhood friends, Natalie and Leah, who grew up on the same kind of council estate in northwest London, in Kilburn. And they've kind of grown up, moved on to quite different lives, but they still stayed in touch. And they've got this kind of quite tense friendship because they've got this kind of shared connection of having grown up together. But as they've grown up, they've wanted different things, and they've kind of grown apart in that sense. But all around them, you also have kind of a few side characters who become very important to both Leah's and Natalie's lives. And this all happens against this backdrop of northwest London, which is described so evocatively. It's so vivid in this book, just in terms of like the characters and the different people who inhabit this particular, just this area of London, which is so different to the rest of London and kind of the rest of the UK as well. There's a lot of discussion about topics like race and class and the intersection between race and class. So like Leah is a kind of lower middle class white woman, and then Natalie is a black woman who grew up lower class but has kind of married into kind of upper middle class life, and some of the tension on their friendship is brought about by this kind of class difference. It was a very interesting read. It had a very slow start. It didn't really pick up, in my opinion, until kind of the third section, where it kind of switched into Natalie's point of view, and you got a lot of insight into hers and Leah's childhoods. There is also something that happens, an event that occurs in the first portion of this book, and I don't want to spoil anything, but I would check content warnings, and it is something that I have DNF'd books over in the past, if I've been reading a book and it happens and I haven't known about it, and also if I know that a book has this event happening in it, I will be very much less inclined to read it. And yeah, I came across this event in this book, and I did come very close to DNFing it. But I decided to push through because I didn't want to DNF my second book of the year. It felt like a little bit of a bad start. And you know, I am quite glad that I pushed through because the rest of the book was very interesting. But yeah, just kind of, it's a I guess a lesson to me to check content warnings. So that is NW by Zadie Smith, and I would actually quite like to read more Zadie Smith in the future. There is a copy of Unbeauty that I spotted in the secondhand bookshop that I work at. I spotted it yesterday, and I've told myself that I'm going to wait until the end of the working day tomorrow, when the shop closes, and if it hasn't been bought by then that is a sign from the world that I can buy the book, and that book is for me. And if it has been bought, then that's fine. So that is my update. Still no 5-star reads. It's been, 2 months by now. I've read a lot of books. No 5 stars. I'm hoping, however, that it all changes with this book. This is Rouge. It's the new book by Mona Awad, and I love Mona Awad's writing. 2 of her books appeared on my best books of 2023 video. That was Bunny, which was my favourite read of the year, and All's Well, which was also fantastic. And yeah, I just really love Mona Awad's writing and her concepts. So I'm really hoping that it's going to be the same with this one. I do have high expectations, and they're going to be met, definitely. So yeah, I am very much looking forward to starting this book, and I will update you when I'm done. You guys, I think we've done it. I think we have finally found our 5-star read. I knew Mona Awad wouldn't let me down, and I knew that this book would be a highlight of my year, and we are, just over 2 weeks into 2024, and I already know that this is going to be a highlight of the year, and it's going to be quite difficult to top this book. So this is Rouge by Mona Awad, and it's a gothic horror novel about a woman called Belle who has just lost her mother, who died under kind of mysterious circumstances. And she's kind of gone to her mother's house in Malibu to kind of put everything in order after her death, and she kind of falls in with this mysterious kind of society that's very upper class. It's very elite. It's called Rouge, and it provides beauty services to people who are in need of them or in want of them. And Belle is obsessed with skincare and making her skin look flawless and bright and all of that, which she kind of got after her mother, and she's thinking that maybe her mother had some kind of connection to the society, and she very gradually kind of gets pulled into Rouge, and everything kind of goes from there, and she discovers that what is going on behind the scenes of Rouge is very sinister. And yeah, I love this book so much. There was so much in this book that I really, really adored. I think it took kind of the best parts from all 3 of her novels, which I read last year, Bunny and All's Well and 13 Ways of Looking at a Fat Girl. All the best parts from those books she took and combined them and used them in this book, which is really great. Something that I have kind of realised about her protagonists is that they're not necessarily good people. They're not particularly nice. They're not the kind of people that you would want to be friends with. However, they are so unbelievably human and real and understandable and sympathetic. I think they make you recognise the negative parts of yourself that you don't necessarily want to recognise. And this book in particular deals really well with themes of complex mother-daughter relationships and growing up and grief, and how internalized racism and colorism can really be damaging to one's self-esteem and self-image. Because the protagonist of this book is mixed race. She has a white mother and an Egyptian father, and her being mixed race and having a darker complexion compared to her mother really plays into her story and her character, and her self-esteem, and the fact that she compares herself so much to her mother really, really strongly affects her. Also, the writing is just so vivid. I've said this about Mona Awad's writing before, but it's the kind of writing you just want to wade into and just submerge yourself into. I think I've said that I have wanted to eat Mona Awad's writing before. I'm sure I've said that on like a reading wrap-up or something, and it's so true. You just want to sink your teeth into it. She just so clearly gets into Belle's head in this book, and like every sentence, every single word choice sounds like it's coming straight from Belle's mind, and it just really sucks you right into the book. Like, as Belle is slowly kind of getting dragged into this society, and she's very slowly kind of growing more and more mad from this treatment that she is getting, there's a lot of kind of word substitutions and mixing up words and stuff, and there's a lot of like symbolism that comes from that. Like, she starts to replace words like skin with sin or kiss with kill, and it kind of infiltrates the prose as well as the dialogue, and it just makes the tone all the more sinister. This was just such a fantastic experience. Like, I really, really enjoyed reading it, and I didn't want it to end, which is something I don't say about books very often. Like, more often than not, I'm like, oh, is this gonna be over soon? I don't know, maybe it's a bit too long, but I simultaneously think that this was the perfect length book, because it does leave you wanting more, but at the same time, I want more. So that was Rouge by Mona Awad, and yes, I am finally giving a 5-star rating. We did it, Joe.
We did it, Joe.
We have found our 5-star book, and therefore this video can finally end. So yeah, that is the end of this video. I can't believe it. It's been literally months since I started, and I can't think off the top of my head how many books I got through and talked about in this video. I don't want to know how many books I talked about in this video, and now the only thing I can think about now is how long it's going to take me to edit this video and how much storage it's going to take up on my iPad. Thank you so much for watching, and a very particular thank you to anyone who has gotten through the whole of this video, because I can't imagine how long the final product is going to be. And if you are watching this now and you've gotten to the end of this video, well done. I congratulate you. If I had been watching this and it wasn't my own video, I would have given up by now. Probably would have given up about 20 minutes ago. If you liked what you saw, please give this video a like, subscribe to my channel. We're not that far into 2024, and I have a lot of plans for the rest of this year. Lots of videos, lots of content to put out. You can also find me on Instagram, TikTok, Storygraph. My username is @WithLivJones. I post pretty often, and again, I have a lot more plans for posting more things on those platforms over the course of the next year, so stay on the lookout for that. Thanks again so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!